Let's turn to trying to put the right provisions in any settlement agreement, and including something we'll talk about, what I'm referring to as pandemic provisions. And I want to get to that at the end of this, but really I want to turn to you, Erica. What do you see maybe is important for guys to be thinking about as they're wanting to try to push this case along, they're wanting to try to resolve their case? What should be addressed in a settlement agreement when they're thinking about it right now?
That's where it's so important that you have an attorney drafting. You can kind of think about family law as, unfortunately, it's sad but true, but there are just landmines everywhere that you can just fall into and cause yourself a lot of heartache and headache down the road. And also, you just don't know what you don't know. In terms of this pandemic time, there are three things that I was thinking about that maybe aren't highlighted. The first thing is for property division. You need to make sure you're very clear what the date of value is that we're using. Values, everybody's looking at their retirement accounts right now, and we're all a little scared, right? And so if you decided to use a value from January 31st, that's a very different value potentially that we're seeing today. So if you had an account that, say, had $50,000 in it, and the agreement was that you had to pay the other side $50,000, now that account might be worth $40,000. And so the $10,000 is now just gone, and you're having to eat it. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is being very clear as to what date you're using for value of assets. And then you also need to be clear about market gains and losses. So if the account goes up between the time when you have the final hearing and when the order is actually processed, or if it goes down, you need to make sure that not just one person is assuming the responsibility for that fluctuation unless that is agreed upon. The second thing is tax deductions. The stimulus checks that went out were a huge relief to a lot of families, but the specific provisions as to how that's going to be impacting future tax filings is important. So it may be that it impacts your tax filing down the road, but it was actually the other side who received the funds. So that's a provision that needs to be addressed, and it's something that you need to talk to your lawyer about and your accountant to find out, okay, we received these funds, who's going to be impacted by it in the future? Is it me or is it the other person? And so make sure that's considered. And finally, that pandemic provision for custody. Situations where there are orders that there shouldn't be any exchanges, right? Or it's unclear whether there should be exchanges. In Wisconsin, the governor of Wisconsin made very clear that placement exchanges were to take place, but other states weren't as clear. So one of the things that you want to make sure you're very clear of is the expectation that placement exchanges are going to continue. Spell out that in the event there is a pandemic, spell out snow days, right? Wisconsin, we have a few of those. Making sure that you're clear that the paramount concern, obviously, is the health and safety of the child, but that the parenting relationship of the child with both of their parents is also to be considered. And the expectation is that the placement is going to occur unless it is not possible.
All right. Before I go to you, Marc, because I have questions about what do you do with a house? Do we sell it? Asa, let me toss it to you real quickly, because I think I don't want to gloss over the property division valuation date for anything that you own. Does New York value property at the time of filing or at the time of the order that's come down?
In New York, it's the date of filing of an action. So we look at that date as a starting point. But like Eric already mentioned, for things like retirement accounts, if the account's going to go up during a period of time, during the course of the divorce and until distribution, there's going to be adjustments for gains and losses. What that really means is that if you're contributing to your account, any principal contributions are going to be your separate property, as we looked at the date of the filing of the action. But the passive gains or losses, the lowering of the market as it is now, that's going to be shared by both parties. Same thing will go for property, real property, marital residence, for example. We're going to look at the value of the property at the time of the filing of the action. But if there's a significant change, that's also going to be considered by the court.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, that's just another element where your state may be very different than, New York, or very different than Wisconsin, and ours it's date of order for valuation or date of hearing. And so maybe now you're out of a job. I think it's important to consult. But Marc, here's the question for you down in Florida. Really, the house. Sometimes it's the party's largest asset. What should they be thinking about in dividing the house, and what kind of provisions should they be thinking about?
Basically, the way that I see it is when it comes to the sale of a residence, if you're considering anything other than it being sold immediately, then you need to have good provisions in place, because this can go on for quite some time. Meaning, if one of the parties is going to retain the asset, what happens to the loan that's been taken out on the home if the other party's name is on it? Is there proper refinance provision for that? If you're trying to leave the kids in the home with one of the parents for a period of time and then they graduate, how do you make sure that the home gets sold? Who's entitled to the home? So there's a lot of questions to be answered when it comes to the sale of a residence, and when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, how somebody gets paid if there's a distribution to be made to the other party. And the last thing, but also important when it comes to that, is the debt. Because the debt, if it's in both parties' names and one party retains the residence, the other party may never be able to purchase a residence until that debt is taken out of their name. Unfortunately, lenders are not part of these, agreements. So you have to make sure that you put in the proper provisions to protect the party that doesn't have the residence anymore, and to ensure that they have no responsibility for it as well.
Yeah, Marc, the thing those are the items that are pretty glaring for people as they think about settlement agreements. It's retirement in my home. The items that are easy to gloss over are something like a health savings account. What should they be thinking there? And maybe even we'll get to custody, but really health savings accounts.
So, that's another, kind of hidden asset, because people don't often think about where they're putting these funds in a health savings account, which is put in tax-free. And then, one person has access to it, the other one doesn't know that it exists, and there's a decent amount of money going in there. So, the question is, over the course of years of depositing money in there, if it's not being used, is the other, party entitled to a portion of that? And do they even know that it's there?
That's huge. And, time sharing with kids, custody, thinking about any of those assets, what else should they be thinking? And kind of they write down notes right now. I know guys are watching. They're thinking, I got to go ask my attorney about this. What else should they be thinking about?
The time sharing is always a big one for me, because time sharing is connected to several things. It's connected to how much you're paying in child support, depending on how much time sharing you have. And the other more important issue is that once you agree to a time sharing plan, it's very difficult to change it later. So you want to make sure that you've put some real thought and effort into what you've contemplated agreeing to, and when you actually agree to it, because to go back and change it, you actually have to prove a large set of facts to make sure that can happen.
Yeah.
So it's important to contemplate it up front.